So I'll be addressing the prompt. So the question's asking what is going on in Lebanon today and why. So to understand what is going on in Lebanon and why it has such a complicated history, or a complicated situation, we have to look back at the country's history. The thing is with usual colonial stories, we expect the story to be the same. It's a group of people that were sovereign at one point, that were subjugated by a colonial power, and eventually got their freedom, and now they're a free country. The thing is, Lebanon is really different because it truly evolved within different time periods. It wasn't always the same. I guess you could make the same argument about any country, but it's very special because of the different diverse communities that live within its borders, Um, and even how it came to fruition in the first place. So, if we want to really answer this question, what is going on in Lebanon, we need to recount some of the history. So, in the beginning, there wasn't really a Lebanon country per se. There was a region called Syria that Lebanon is in, with Sham in Arabic, which consisted of Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And a part of that region was called Mount Lebanon, and that was it's not the entire country of Lebanon today. It is a big part of the country today, though, Mount Lebanon. And it was hard to, at this time, the Syria region was directly ruled by the Ottoman Empire, but this region of Mount Lebanon was hard for the Ottomans to control directly. So the Ottomans relied on local Druze chieftains to rule Mount Lebanon, and they collected taxes, and, as long as they collected their taxes and sent the money to the Ottomans, it was fine. It was a good deal, and it worked out for both parties. However, the old Druze order eventually died out, and they became Sunni Muslims instead, and they were still associated with the old order. They still kept the old system going on, but they were just now Sunni Muslims. Eventually, Lebanon was ruled by a leader named his full name. Let me get his full name. His full name was Amir Basha Chihab II, and he was ruling Mount Lebanon for a long time. The problem with him, though, was he was associated with a wily Ottoman governor that was the de facto ruler of Egypt that kind of went against the Ottomans for a little bit. His name was Muhammad Ali Pasha. He was a ruler of Egypt for a small amount of time, and he was going against the Ottoman Empire. And this guy, Shihab of Lebanon, was associated with him. So this was a big problem for the Ottomans because, they're both kind of allies and they're both going against the Ottoman Empire. This is not something really great. So, also another thing to add on, Shihab was also quite controversial because he had relied on Druze families to put him in power in the first place, but he kind of broke ties with them and had a falling out with them. So he was very controversial in Lebanon as well, not just to the Ottomans. Eventually, he was removed, deposed, and the new rulers they converted to Maronite Christianity. Um, and the rulers were Maronite Christians at that time. So that's kind of what transpired. After that, this was within I believe in the 1840s, 1850s. In 1860, there was the 1860 conflicts that occurred when an independent Maronite, his name, let me get his specific name, Tanis Shahin, he was a Maronite who led a peasant revolt in 1858, deposing Christian nobility in Lebanon, Mount Lebanon, and establishing a short-lived republic in a place called Kesserwan. The problem with him was after establishing this kind of independent village, he would start attacking Druze and Maronite villages. This would lead to a civil war. So because of this unrest and this civil unrest in the region, and Druze villages, fighting Maronite, and Muslim villages also fighting Maronites, a famous Algerian, kind of stepped in to kind of hopefully try to stop the civil unrest in the region. His name was Amir Abdel Qadir. He was a very famous, influential Algerian military leader that had fought in Algeria. He had gained a lot of experience from his time there. I believe with stuff relating to independence for Algeria. And he had attempted to protect the Maronites in the Christian quarter in Damascus. So the violence was so bad that it had actually not just only spread to Mount Lebanon. It had not only spread to the villages in Mount Lebanon, but it was spreading to Syria as well. So he was there to he had a mansion there, and he was trying to he was trying to save the Maronite Christians. He was successful to a degree, but people did still end up dying. So he was there to, he had his own I believe it was his own personal force of soldiers, and he was there to stop more people from, more bloodshed from occurring. And for his service as well, he was awarded medals of honor by European powers, European countries. And because of this, these European powers, they were hearing about this, what these massacres and the civil unrest. The the European powers were urging the Ottomans, you got to protect your minorities, you got to protect your Maronite Christians more. Look what's going on. So the Ottomans, in response to this 1860 civil war, the Ottomans replaced the old divided Lebanon regions with an autonomous Lebanese region that was led by a Christian leader. Um, as a result of this civil war, French sphere of influence would grow in Syria because the French, they were kind of aligning to themselves with the Maronite Christians because they were a minority, and they felt bad. I mean, look, they were claiming to associate with them. However, was this the true motives of the French at the time? I would beg to differ, me personally, because I believe, or it's fair to say that this was, the French were starting to um, exploit the Ottomans' weaknesses and started saying, okay, the Ottomans are very loose when it comes to protecting their minorities. We could exploit this later. Anyway, moving on. Um, all so because of all of these like violent acts that were happening in the 1860 Civil War. Um, oh, sorry. um, Before I mention that next part. The Ottomans also sent out a bill, specifically Sultan Abdul Majid. He issued an imperial reform edict which aimed to equalize all citizens regardless of religion. So this had some positives. So like in a way he did respond to the worries of the European powers. Um he basically kind of said, okay, we're going to make sure that everyone is treated equally. However, um the Muslims at the time didn't really like that. The Maronites were happy because now they had more rights, but I think the Muslims felt that they had their rights taken away, because of that edict by the Sultan. And the French prided themselves on being the protectors of the Maronites, and they were outraged. They claimed to be outraged. They also sent a European sort of strike force of soldiers to be stationed in Lebanon to protect and maintain order in Lebanon. So again, we're starting to see like the decline of the Ottoman influence in the Lebanese region. European powers, France, kind of decide telling everyone else and deciding we're here, we align ourselves with the Maronite Christians. We are here to be with the Lebanese people, or so they claim. And then moving on after that, after 1860, a lot of these violent acts, they caused a lot of Lebanese people to leave Lebanon because, as they saw it, Lebanon was very unstable at the time. And, it's not a great future to have if you have constant bickering and fighting in villages and massacres. And, a lot of Lebanese people left. They left to the west or they stayed in the east. They went to places like Egypt or the Middle East. But a good amount of them did go to America and the New World and Brazil. So that is a big reason why you do see them today in Brazil. Huge numbers in America. Um, as we keep going on, during this time, the Nahda was going on. The Nahda was sort of an Arabic Renaissance, and a lot of Lebanese people were contributing towards this movement. It's basically an Arab Renaissance. People like Khalil Gibran, Ibrahim Al Yazigi, Salam Tekla, just a lot of people, Lebanese people that were going around and moving out of Lebanon and spreading they played major roles in the Nahda. So that was going on during this time. That's worth mentioning. So after that, Lebanon was relatively stable at this time, and at this time, the decline of the Ottoman Empire was continuing, and nationalism from European countries was spreading to the Lebanese people. So the Lebanese people started forming these ideas of, okay, we are Lebanese people. Um, and Beirut became a fast growing and prosperous city. It was actually promoted to a vilayet by the Ottomans, a first level administrative division. They had a lot of silk exports, a French built railway connecting it to Syria, Damascus, I believe, and a lot of brain drain from rural areas to coastal cities. So, we're seeing a lot more growth in the more important parts of Lebanon, making it, the cities stronger and more people, increasing the population, a lot more modernization, a lot more, you could say brain drain from the rural areas, but brain gain in the big cities. Um, and yeah, so Lebanon was becoming a rich and prosperous zone within the Ottoman Empire, Beirut specifically, especially. But then we get to 1914, and at this point, the Ottomans go into World War I, and they fight against the French, the English, and the Russians with the Germans and the Austrians. And the Ottomans knew that Lebanon was kind of exposed, and they didn't like the fact that Europeans were just kind of like marching in and sending their troops. And Lebanon was special in that case because the Europeans, that was kind of the closest they could just get into the Middle East. So the Ottomans sent their soldiers and some of their army to kind of maintain order in the region and make sure no Europeans could like come in and just like cause a bunch of like ruckus. Specifically, the leader was his name was Jamal al Pasha, that was sent by the Ottomans, and he was very harsh. A lot of Lebanese and Syrians hated him, and they called him the Bloodshedder as his nickname. So he was very unpopular. So that was during World War One, and during World War One, the 1915, the Great Famine of Mount Lebanon occurred. This was because the Ottoman Empire was getting blockaded by the European powers. In war, blockades happen. So they happen because they want usually the countries want to pressure the opposition countries to surrender because they're trying to starve them out of food supplies, and they're trying to make their citizens rowdy so that they could revolt against their government and hopefully end the war early. So that was a strategy they were doing, and the Great Famine occurred. Huge lack of food, there was malnutrition, diseases everywhere amongst populations, and this remained until the war had ended. So the war ended, Sykes-Picot happened, Treaty of Versailles, most importantly, and all the Arab countries were carved out for the European powers. Specifically, we're focusing on Lebanon and Syria. They were granted to the French under the French mandate, and France had created a Greater Lebanon. So now it was not only just Mount Lebanon for the Ottomans. Now for France, it was a Greater Lebanon that had included Mount Lebanon and major coastal cities like Tripoli, Sidon, and obviously Beirut. And they had created this project as a safe haven for the Lebanese Maronite Christians or Lebanese Christians. But they included these coastal cities, which would cause issues because these coastal cities had major Muslim populations. And to solve this issue, so hopefully solve issues, they created the National Pact of 1943, which was based on the 1932 census. This is going to come in later. This was created between the Muslims and the Christians, and the key points included that there would be a Maronite president and commander of the armed forces, a Sunni prime minister, a Shia speaker of parliament, Greek Orthodox deputy speaker and prime minister, a Druze chief of general staff of armed forces, and a 6-to-5 ratio in favor of Christians to Muslims in parliament. So eventually they adopted this pact, and Lebanon gained independence in 1943 from the French, the year after that pact, or the same year of the pact. The problem was with this pact specifically was that it was crafted on a census that was about 10 years ago, and population dynamics change, and they will change. That spoiled, not just from birth rates, but a lot of events occurred in the future that would change the population dynamics in Lebanon. So basically what ended up happening was the Nakba occurred. I believe it was in 1945, the first Nakba, and a lot of Palestinians went into Lebanon, which worried the sectarian leaders, especially the Christians, because now they had sizable numbers, and they didn't want to upset the balance of power that was already established by the National Pact of 1943. So seeing that these Palestinians were coming in, the leaders of Lebanon chose, okay, we're not going to integrate them as Lebanese citizens. We're going to keep them in the refugee camps as refugees and separate from us. But this would become a problem later on more and more. Eventually, a famous man in Lebanon, famous president, one of the famous leaders, his name is, Camille Chamon. And this guy was a little bit controversial. Not a little bit, he was controversial. He took power in 1952, so after Lebanon was independent for a time. And he was a major supporter of the United States, which a lot of Lebanese Muslims and Druze did not like. So they didn't like the fact he was very pro-US, and intentions were ignited, especially when Chamon troops had fired on protesters when there was protesters. So there was some tensions rising between Maronite Christians and Muslims and Druze. Also, at the same time, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who happened to be president of Egypt at the time, started sensing and seeing this discontent from the opposition in Lebanon, and he started supporting anti-Shimon factions in Lebanon. He was a pro-Arab, pan-Arab nationalist, who believed in Arab socialism and pan-Arabism. So he wanted to. He was also like he believed in like this connection of Arabs between like religion as well. So he was going to support like these Muslim and anti-Shimon factions. Um, the following year, Egypt, Syria. So after 1952, the following year, Egypt and Syria had formed the Arab Republic, which again worried the Christian leaders of Lebanon even more because their neighbor had united with Egypt with Gamil Abdel Nasser, who was a pan-Arabist. So no doubt that Gamil Abdel Nasser was now looking at Lebanon to be the next state in their United Arab Republic. Who knows? So they got really worried. Um, then and this also, yeah, so this as a result of the UAR now officially forming, the pro-Nasserists became more active in Lebanon than usual. Later on, when a newspaper editor that was critical of Shimon's government was assassinated, all hell broke loose, and anti-government and anti-American riots broke out all across Lebanon. Syria began arming militants. Shimon called for help from the Americans, and Eisenhower deployed U.S. Marines to Lebanon in order to maintain order because they did not want to lose such an important ally in the region. In order to calm down things in Lebanon, Fuad Shahab, who was a more moderate leader, was appointed president as a moderate compromise to stop this civil war from getting worse. So they had avoided a scare for a time, would come back again though. Yeah. So as we go on more, Beirut underwent a period of relative prosperity for a little while. Western countries and wealthy Persian Gulf states invested into Lebanon, increasing its wealth and prosperity. So there was a lot of good going on for Lebanon. It was relatively peaceful. It was a great time. However, bad news would come back again. So after the events of the 1967 war with Israel knocking out Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, and Black September, the PLO was here. The PLO relocated to Lebanon, where the Sunni Muslims in Lebanon welcomed them with open arms, the guerrilla forces of the PLO. Yasser Arafat was the leader of the PLO, was welcomed into Lebanon by the Sunni Muslims. So with their introduction, they kind of equalized the balance of power between the Muslims and the Christians. So now it was like a 50-50 split. It was very close because now you had an influx of Sunni Muslims coming into the country. Lots of Palestinians in Lebanon were influenced by Gabil Abdel Nasser of his ideas of pan-Arabism and pan-Arab nationalism and Arab socialism. So again, the Christian leaders of Lebanon are, they're starting to get concerned again. This is really bad. They don't like this. Lebanese Christians were on the opposite end. They wanted to focus on a Lebanon for Lebanese people. So a major Maronite political party was formed by Pierre Gamiel, and it was modeled on Italian and Spanish fascist policies that were in the past 1940s. And a multitude of actions and tensions were what led to the actual Lebanese civil war. So it took a bunch of tensions and a bunch of incidents amongst the two opposing factions. And two key incidents are noted. The first incident was Shimon wanted to monopolize fishing off the coast of the city of Sidon in the south of Lebanon. But unionized fishermen led by a man named Maruf Saad led a small demonstration to oppose Shimon. However, Saad was shot in this demonstration and killed during this demonstration by someone who was guessed or thought to have been associated with the Lebanese army. The funeral of Saad eventually evolved into a massive demonstration by the Lebanese and Palestinian Muslims, and violent protests erupted across the entire country. Another situation as well, Pierre Gamial, remember the leader of the Qataya party, the Christian Maronite party, he was at a baptism ceremony in East Beirut, and a leftist gunman in a truck that had the words of a leftist Palestinian group attempted to shoot him from their truck, and they killed about 4 people, but they didn't assassinate Pierre Gamial. And Gamial's political party was an outrage, and they set up checkpoints throughout the city of Beirut. When these members stopped a bus that had civilians returning from a pro-PLO political rally, they fired on it and killed everyone in the bus, claiming that they were PLO guerrillas. As a result of this event, the armed clashes begun. The PLO started fighting the Kataib. The ID cards would denote religion on them, which allowed the Kataib to kill more people, because now they could see who's Muslim and who wasn't. And massacres were committed by the Kataib. The PLO retaliated as a result. Foreign countries also got involved, such as Western powers. Syria was switching sides. Israel was also involved. Sometimes attacking the Maronite Christians and then assisting them. It was very complicated. The PLO accepted defeat eventually and were allowed to escape to Tunisia, but the civil war would still carry on until 1990. So at this point, that's the major event that that kind of all of these tensions kind of built up. Remember how we mentioned Lebanon originally was ruled by Druze, then Maronite Christians, and they started taking supremacy of the country, and then issues between the different religions. This is sort of what it boiled up to, the Lebanese Civil War. But that ended. Even though there were still tensions during that time, eventually we would get to the birth of Hezbollah in 1982, which was before the Lebanese Civil War, but it was the beginning, and this was formed as a side effect of the 1982 Israeli invasion. It was a loose collection of Shia villages in the valley, in a valley called the Bekaa Valley, and they just wanted to expel foreign forces from Lebanon. That was just their primary goal. And there was a series of bombings by the Islamic Jihad organization, where they bombed the U.S. Embassy and French barracks in Beirut, forcing the multinational force out of Lebanon by 1984. So they were getting foreign powers outside of their country, so it was working to an extent. The IGO eventually became affiliated with Hezbollah later on. The War of Camps and War of Brothers occurred. This was an intra-Shia conflict that happened in the late 80s, where Hezbollah eventually just consorted their power and absolved the other Shia dissidents that were against them. And then there was the Taif Agreement. This was the actual end of the civil war. So, this is talking about Hezbollah forming. Then there was the agreement to end the civil war. Hezbollah was the only group that maintained its arsenal while other militias disarmed. It's because they claimed because Israel was still occupying a part of South Lebanon, so they still needed their weapons. And then Hezbollah started entering the political scene as well, becoming a recognized political party, a legitimate one. Maybe not so in the beginning, but eventually would become one. And they would win seats in Lebanese parliament as well. And Israel did withdraw from Lebanon in 2000. They drew from southern Lebanon. This was seen as a major victory for Hezbollah. So not only was Hezbollah gaining major political influence, they were winning seats in the cabinet, but they also managed to push Israel out without relinquishing their right to have their arsenal as well, which was a big cheer for the Lebanese people, especially Lebanese Shia. And then there was the 2006 Lebanon War, where this was a border dispute. So it was Israel versus Hezbollah over the border between South Lebanon and Israel. And then there was a Syrian civil war involvement, which was kind of the last of the major events. Hezbollah decided to fight alongside Bashar al-Assad. In his war against the Syrian rebels, I believe. So that sort of describes the history up until now. I said all of this history for important reasons. Some important people I forgot to mention. I probably didn't mention Hassan Nasrallah. He was a longtime Secretary General of Hezbollah, he became the leader after Musawi, Abbas al-Musawi, who was one of the founders of Hezbollah. And Bashar al-Assad is the Syrian president who Hezbollah aided in the Syrian civil war. Now, here's the thing. There is some gaps in the history that I recounted. Some things I do want to mention. The Mount Lebanon in the 1840s was largely autonomous. It was known as an emirate by the Ottomans. And also specifically with the 1860 conflicts, there was a I want to say this correctly, Mutasarrafat of Mount Lebanon. This was the specific name that I talked about, how the Ottomans made an autonomous region for Lebanon ruled by Maronite Christians. It was called the Mutassafarat of Mount Lebanon. As well, I don't know if there's anything else I need to finish. Specifically with the French Mandate, I didn't mention strategies, but the way that they governed Lebanon when they had control of it until 1943, their administrative strategies, they modeled the governance of Lebanon on its Third Republic, with a constitution in 1926 that established a parliamentary system. So that's how the Lebanese parliament started in the beginning. There was a divide and rule doctrine, where France used a divide and conquer strategy. So they favor the Maronite Christians where they didn't favor other groups like the Druze and the Muslims. And, this worked out in their favor because they ensured a loyal, crowd in their region. It would always be the Maronite Christians that would be on the side of the French against any other dissidents, and they could use that to their advantage at any time. So they would always kind of have their like puppets in power against all other groups. And the French did aid in institutionalizing sectarianism, convincing them and institutionalizing sectarian quotas because the country was so diverse. They did not want they did not want the other minorities to overpower their minority that they were supporting, the Maronite Christians. And yeah, and there was the issues of conflicting nationalism. So now let's go back to the question. I recounted history. I filled in the gaps. That's all fine and dandy. But let's talk about the question itself now. What is going on in Lebanon today and why? So when we talk about Lebanon today, it's not so much that there is still the same degree of sectarian violence. There may be sectarian violence present, but the dynamics have shifted immensely. Now we are seeing a Lebanon in this current day and age that is dominated by the Shia Muslims, dominated by Hezbollah. That's kind of the main military force in Lebanon. There is still the Lebanese provisional government that still does follow this national pact. However, it is to a weaker extent. It is not as powerful, I believe, as Hezbollah. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure of this fact. So Hezbollah is kind of like the de facto like they kind of have supremacy over Lebanon, if that kind of makes sense. Although they don't have control over Beirut, I believe, and they kind of just leave the Lebanese provisional government to do its own thing. But there isn't really that same degree of sectarian violence anymore. There aren't like just open killings of like groups anymore. Druze are a very a very small minority of the population now. The dynamics, I believe, for the other, three main religions, Maronites, Sunni, and Shia, all of them are each in the 30% each. So they're very equal to each other. It's not as if like the Sunnis and Shias are kind of uniting against the Maronites. It's still kind of split. Also, the sentiment of Lebanese people, it doesn't seem to be to the same degree as before, as we can see in media today and and news today and news topics today. They're not having these same extreme views that they should hate each other because we are from different religions. It's a lot more accepting now. The culture is a lot more accepting. It's a lot more loving and open. So that is something that is recognized today now, especially within America. This is very apparent. Lebanese people are a monolith, but they all, for the most part, kind of have this accepting nature towards each other. It's not to the same degree. We probably won't see like a Lebanese civil war anytime soon, because it's just not to the same degree anymore. The Shia Muslims do their own thing in South Lebanon with Hezbollah against Israel because they're focused. Their mission statement is to go against Israel and kick out the foreign powers from their land in Lebanon. And the Lebanese provisional government is still following the same rules. They still have the national pact. They're doing their own thing. So there isn't any of this like conflict today. So I'd say going on Lebanon today, it's a lot better now, for sure. I believe, in my opinion, it's a lot more calm. Why? Well, why is this the case? Looking at the past historical events, it honestly had to do with a lot with the rise of Hezbollah, I believe. The fact is, after the Lebanese Civil War, I mean, it occurred and it ended. They fixed their country. They got back to normal. They needed a period of rest. Hezbollah did rise in power. And they kind of took over like, what should Lebanon be doing now? And they're busy with Israel. So honestly, in a way, you could say one of the reasons is Israel today is kind of like a unifying force. Like Lebanese people, for the most part, want their sovereign land and they want to be sovereign people. Israel is a security threat to them. Hezbollah is making sure, of like reminding the people like to unite against this foreign force that seems antagonistic to them. but also just like the sentiment is just not the same degree anymore. Like they just don't hate each other anymore as they used to. It's a lot, I believe it's a lot, it's more civilized. They accept each other more, as I said before. So it's a lot more calm because of these reasons, because of the Civil War, because they're unified against one foreign power that is seen as the enemy by everyone. Um, Sort of us versus them mentality that kind of shuts down sectarian violence for a time, and allows people to focus on the more important issues in their country. Also, globalization, trade, just the fact that wars are not as easy to conduct anymore. It's a lot to just do a war. It's a lot to do a civil war. People are more apprehensive before they take up guns and fight people and kill people. Where it was easier back then, it's not as easy now. You can't really go to a people and say, "Look, I'm going to give you weapons. Start a civil war now and go against and kill this people, kill these people because they're a different religion than you." That doesn't really work anymore because of the 21st century, because of media, because of education, literacy rates, people getting more education, realizing that there are other ways to mediate differences other than war. A lot of this stuff was happening in rural areas, villagers, soldiers at that time. They were from rural villages. That is another thing that also has like education, globalization, just understanding like there is a world around us, and there is the choice of we don't have to shed blood to make differences in our government and in our lives. There's the parliament, there is the government. Oh, that's another thing I forgot to mention. Hezbollah does still dominate the parliament, so that was also a big reason why they just kind of rule Lebanon. That's just kind of how it is. So, and honestly, no one really complains. At least I don't think so. Even like the Maronite Christians, they don't really hold. Like I don't think the Kataib party even really exists anymore. It's not really to the same degree as it once was, where it was like very powerful. It's very weak now, I believe. So Hezbollah. So I'd chalk it up to multiple reasons, and I'll just go over it once again. What is going on in Lebanon today, and why? How did it come to this state? It's very calm now within society, not with Israel, obviously. Sectarianism kind of has decreased by a good amount, and it has for a couple reasons, because of the focus on sovereignty for the Lebanese people against Israel and foreign powers, against the American domination as well and French domination. Because of globalization, technology, the 21st century, and education and literacy rates, people are becoming more educated and realizing that there are other ways to go around this. And also the third reason was because of Hezbollah's dominance over Lebanon. Hezbollah has dominated Lebanon. They have basically taken over Lebanon. They control like the military. They have so much military infrastructure. They're aligned with Iran. They're a very powerful force in the region. So they are not someone to be messed with. And certainly, I don't think any political force within Lebanon really wants to mess with Hezbollah themselves, because they are very powerful. So I would kind of chalk it up to those three reasons. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I have to say. So that's my opinion. I hope it was accepted. I hope I did a good job of like explaining the history. But that's kind of how I would answer the question. And yeah, thank you very much. Have a good day.